Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we have another wonderful webinar discussion as part of WELA's Earth Laws Month. And in a moment, I'll introduce our guest speakers, Louise DUXBURY and Asma Gadira. And I hope I'm saying your name right, Gadira. Thank you. Do let me know if I need to say it differently. Before we commence our commencements, I would like to just do a little bit of housekeeping and let you all know about the wonderful things that we've been up to here in WELA. So firstly, yes, very excited today to be speaking with Louise and Asma about women's environmental leadership in Australia. But first, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the absolutely beautiful lands of the Kabi Kabi and Jinnaburra traditional custodians. This is lands of folks in what is now called Southeast Queensland. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present, emerging leaders and young people, and acknowledge that land was never ceded. We do live now and will always live on Aboriginal lands. Here in WELA and within our sister organisations Future Dreaming and New Economy Network Australia, we like to acknowledge country. We like to acknowledge also that many of us, myself in particular, are descendants of the folks who came over as part of the British Empire. And we like to acknowledge that we're really committed to decolonising the way we think, feel and act on this glorious continent of ours so that we can all be good earthlings and good citizens. And as our elder and mentor, Mary Graham says, it's all about caring for country and caring for kin, looking after each other. So that's my acknowledgement. It's become quite the Zoom tradition for folks to pop into the chat, whose country you're on, where you are today, share a little bit of your weather reports. It's really nifty having people from all around Australia say hello. So thank you so much. Earth Laws Month is an initiative that we started last year and hosting again this year, where basically we're inviting fabulous people to come and talk about their work, share updates about issues across a whole range of topics, including Western science, Indigenous knowledge, law, economics, education, ethics, creativity in the arts, and so much more. Today, we're looking at women in environmental leadership. And just so you know, the recordings for all of our talks and discussions, most of them from the past 2 weeks are already on our website, thanks to our fabulous WELAite James Lee and Sarah Bashforth getting it done. So if you've missed any of our webinars, please do go back and watch them at your leisure. And I think all I wanted to do was a plug for 2 more events this week. We've got a really gorgeous nature journaling workshop. It's one of the few events through Earth Laws Month that has a price. That's because our delightful artist friend needs an income. So if you'd like to join us, we will be there with bells on, thinking about how we can reflect and capture elements of the living world around us. And on Friday, another artist's perspective. Christopher Wright is many things. He's a professor and does lots of academic and intellectual things, but he'll be talking about some remarkable photographs. He's a really wonderful photographer, and looking at what the toxic sludge and other weird things look like from the air and what it tells us about ourselves and our beautiful planet suffering under the burden of our pollution. Doesn't sound too cheerful, but it will be. It will be awesome. So please do join us. And now, without further ado, oh, Danelle's listening in from Bali. That's exciting. Hello, Danelle. Without further ado, I'm really happy to hand over to Louise and Asma. I'm a huge fan of the work of WELA, and I see a lot of their events and their mentoring and the retreats and the support they offer to women in this often beautiful but often difficult field of working to care for our earth. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to you lovely ladies, and if you'd like to introduce some elements of yourselves however you wish, I will leave that in your hands. Oh, and so the lovely ladies will talk for a while, then we'll open up to Q&A. All questions, just pop them in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And hello, everyone. As I wrote, we're not so far away, Michelle, as I'm joining in from beautiful Bundjalung country. And I live on the land of Arakwal people, most specifically, also known as Byron Bay in the Northern Rivers. I would also like to extend my respects and acknowledgements to the First Nations of peoples of my country, Morocco, where a lot of the populations has been devastated by a terrible earthquake 10 days ago, and but the resilience and the hospitality and hope and generosity, which is the DNA of my culture, came together as the whole country stepped up to support and help the people living in the mountains of the Atlas, where all villages were really hardly hit. So just wanted to take some time to pay my respects and connect all peoples around the world who share a deep passion and connection for land, community, spirituality, and more. So before starting as well, talking about WELA, I thought I might quickly introduce myself, and Lou, you can do that later, and we'll show you that we are part of a bigger kick-ass team at WELA. So in WELA, I'm a learning experience designer, which means that I'm in charge. I help WELA design and facilitate the programs that we have, and also host smaller intensive leaderships program. We'll tell you a little bit more about it. And I've been in Australia for 3 years. I came for a wedding and got stuck at the beginning of COVID. And you know, life teaches you a lot of lessons. And this one was one of them. The silver linings is that I found a beautiful community. I spent the last 10 or 12 years exploring collaborative practices, system change, feminism, leadership, and regenerative practices as well. I started my career as a business consultant, so it's quite different, and then went working online before it was a thing during COVID. I managed international development program in Middle East and North Africa, also known as West Asia and North Africa. Lived between Europe, Berlin, France, and South America. So I've done a lot of work in the global South, connecting activists, change makers, and organizing leadership retreats around the world as well, with different change makers and leaders trying to have a social impact. And I've worked as well as an intersectional feminist in the Middle East and North African region mostly. So I was very excited to find this intersection here at WELA. And yeah, I think that's it. We'll tell you a little bit more if you have any questions. But the space of this not-for-profit has enabled to bring all these skills together into one beautiful community. Lou, do you want to say a little bit more about yourself as well?
Sure. So I'm the lead facilitator with WELA, and greetings to a couple of you who have been part of WELA. It's lovely to see you on the call. WELA is a space for me that just brings all my skills of the past several decades of working on environment and climate and community development together. So that's why I was so eager to be part of this discussion when Michelle offered us the opportunity, because it's about making the greatest impact for setting a very different goal for the whole of our species on this planet. And so my background is in activism, first up, in opposed to nuclear energy and uranium mining, and looking for peace across the planet, and involvement with the Franklin blockade, and certainly stepped into that wholeheartedly and was doing some of the training there on nonviolent direct action, and was arrested during that. And it was certainly a transformative experience, and became more involved in that aspect of assisting people to know when the current institutions are actually not serving our society. And I moved then to the country looking for a place where my heart was more connected to place and on country. So I live in an intentional community of 15 households in Pibbleman country on near Denmark, on the south coast of WA. and it's been so important for me because it's my resource out of which I do everything else that I do, and set up an organisation, Green Skills, and it's lovely to see you here, Di, who's been very involved with that, Di Evers, in order to do transformation work on the South Coast and in other parts of WA. So it's been such a privilege to be part of WELA since 2016, when the first program was started, and it's fulfilling exactly what it set out to fulfill. And I'm handing it over to Asma just to really take us through what we did set out to do and who we are.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lou. I might share some slides just as a background. You should be seeing them. Yeah, awesome. So this is our team, and I'll take some time to also explain you why we're presenting this together with Lou, and the experience and age diversity that we represent as well together, because it's part of WELA's DNA. Also want to acknowledge that our team grew. In the last week, we hired an additional person who's in charge of operations, and another person who's conducting a research to get some more data on gender and the impact of gender on climate, because we have a strong theory of change and we need more data to back it up. There's a lot of data existing currently for the impact of gender and climate mostly for global South countries, which is the more PC name for developing countries, but not necessarily in Australia. So that's what we're trying to produce. And WELA, as Lou said, was born out of the modern matriarchs of the environment movement, or the matriarchs of the modern environment movement, knowing that the environment and climate has been protected and held and cared for millennia by our First Nations peoples here. So when we say matriarchs, we talk about the women who came in a few decades ago to set up institutional organization, not-for-profit, and politic organization as well, to protect and support our environment. So Wilderness Society, the Greens, yeah, lots of other different organizations as well, but you never heard of them because they're not at the forefront. So that WELA was originated to create a support system and elevate the representations of these women and these leaders doing all the work in the background, behind the scenes, and not recognized enough, and also not having enough power and resources to actually change the system deeply. So the main sort of that legacy is very important for us at WELA, because we all work very collaboratively, and it's very essential for us to acknowledge where we come from and whose shoulder we're standing on and what work we're promoting. And this is the walking the talk part. We're moving from an ego-based society to an eco-based society, also by the way we work. And Lou, if you feel like jumping in anytime to add to what I'm saying, please feel free to do so. But basically, WELA works at the intersection of both transforming women's leadership and how women show up and as represented in the existing systems that we operate in. So pushing women in higher leadership roles, and also recognizing that they are leading from the back and supporting them to do that as well. And the other intersection is environmental action. So climate and environmental action throughout all sectors. We're talking about not-for-profits, government, state government, local government, grassroots and community activism, and volunteer work as well, because there are many ways that we act to save our environment, and that's why we're trying to address. You're going to hear the word intersection a lot, because not only it's embedded in our identity, but also in what we teach, and Louise is going to tell you a little bit more about it. So we, WELA has started as a flagship, with a flagship leadership program built on retreat, 5 days, week-long retreats, face-to-face retreats, and also online courses. And it's like a 6 months national leadership program that Louise is currently leading. We also have, since last year, a series of intensive programs, which are 4 days long programs that are tailored to regions or topics that we design and co-design in partnerships with different organizations. That is to help us scale and grow and address the system deeply, and yeah, sort of give a flavor of what it is to be like, to be part of a community, to be part of a support network, and also to learn that system change and eco-feminist approach in the way we do our work, collaborate with each other, and the content that we consume and share as well. So typically we did, for example, we did a leadership program for intensive leadership program for singer-songwriter women in Tasmania. We did one in Southeast Queensland and in WA as well. So these are more regional. We did an intensive with women working in local government. So I'm going to take the opportunity to say, if you want to co-design an intensive for us, please get in touch. There are many ways that we can get this out of the ground. The second very important layer of what we do is build a community. We have our alumni network. Currently, we have 230 people who went through our program since 2016. That's across the National Leadership Program and the intensives. And we also have a Slack community. If you're not familiar with Slack, I'll add a link in the chat, but it's a tool to connect people online, where we have currently about 500 women from across Australia who connect and share resources, opportunity, wins, celebrate together. So, because that's a very important part of going out in the world and having an impact and action. The other big project that we started this year, and if you go on our website, it's just live as of today, is the Giving Circle. So currently globally only 0.2% of international charity funding goes to women-led environmental projects. That's a very, very small number. So we know that change is great, and learning and giving tools and connecting people is fantastic to implement change, but funding is also important. So it was, so we got off the ground a Giving Circle, which is a group of people. Currently we have 100 members who vote to allocate their funding. Funding is $1,000 a year, and goes toward a selected shortlist of projects to allocate the grant. So as a funder and as a donor, you get directly involved in the decision making and supporting the projects that you want to get involved with. And then the advocacy is kind of crossing all our programs. As I said earlier, our theory of change is more gender empowerment. So having more women and gender diverse people stepping up in leadership positions means that we have better environmental outcomes for everyone, because currently the leadership that we have is not working and is taking us straight to the wall. there is data that you can see here, so I'm not going to read it again, but like there is existing data that shows that actually having more women in leadership roles in the workforce recognizing their work has a strong impact, not only for the environment, but also in the workplace, because women and gender diverse folks tend to work in a more collaborative and networked way, and that's kind of how nature works as well, and that's how we're trying to model in our programs. Sorry, I don't know why I'm. Oh. So we know we're having an impact because our participants told us that we're having an impact as well. So we're going to focus today on the programs, because that's what Lou and I lead, and also that's what we want to share with you today, as well as we're going to open up soon our call for application for the 2024 National Leadership Programs. We'll have 2 next year as we're expanding. So going through the program has helped our participants feel that they understand what power they have to change, because often that's what we feel, that we are like in front of a system that's really hard to modify and change. So yeah, that's the women see that they have the impact and they can step up and use their power. As I said, this is our alumni over cross organization, the online community of 3,000 that's across our website and our Slack community. We'll also share these slides later, so you get to see them. And our alumni have gone on taken actually concrete step to change the projects. And I feel that I've been talking a lot, so I might hand it over to you, Lou, so you can tell us a little bit more about our alumni and our programs.
Thanks, Asma. Some of the work that we've been able to support has been the work of the amazing participants. So the things that they get from coming to be part of WELA is about the acknowledgement that the work that they do is really powerful, and that they're not alone. And quite often you can feel isolated in the face of the institutional structures within which we are all trying to make changes. Having support is a key aspect of the program, but also being able to lead in an authentic way that isn't the sort of a hero leadership, which is exactly what the earth does not need. The earth needs a nurturing, collaborative, one that's based upon relationships. And so we talk about relational practice as a fundamental, and that relationship is about relationship to yourself, relationship to other people, relationship to the whole of the natural world. So we are in relationship, and I certainly don't need to tell you that. So for just a small example of what that looks like is that Nicola Rivers, who is part of the program, and she works for Environmental Justice Australia in Victoria, she put a proposition in her workplace to share, to be co-CEOs. Now, that was not really in the framework of that institution. Well, that changed. She had confidence as a result of being part of WELA. She knew that she was not going to be able to do that work. She had young family. So she had the confidence and the support to proposition a different way of leading. And she's just gone from strength to strength in a collaborative way. We've had people, one of my friends, Jess Beckerling, she was doing the WELA program at the same time as in her role as the WA Forest Alliance lead. And that was at a critical time leading up to the announcement to stop native forest logging in Western Australia. And she said that the support that she got through WELA and the tools that she had and developed, and her self-confidence all together, was absolutely critical to that period of time for her to be able to manage it and stay with that program, that project. Just to the next slide. Thanks, Asma. So these are just some examples. Thanks, Asma. For some of the other people. And what you can see is that they are across different spheres. There are people working internationally, nationally, and in their own patches. And there's the recognition that that's what we all are doing, and that all of that is valuable. We're all part of that jigsaw where we're creating a totally different picture of how we work together, how we live together, and how we interact with all of the natural world around us. And if we don't do that, we're going to get the outcome that the current leadership is really still driving us towards. So next slide. Thanks, Asma. So I just wanted to talk about the curriculum. So what you can see is that we've got 4 major areas that we cover. And for me, because I'm a big picture person, the systems change is the one that is it's the goal in the end. Everything that we do is about, well, how do we change the way the whole of our society derives purpose and value, and it's changing the goalposts. And I think that's why it speaks so centrally to the fantastic work that the AELA does, because that's absolutely fundamental to both of us. And in order for us to be able to better see how we can make those changes, we then work on leadership and that different type of leadership that is needed, our personal development and the skills that we need and the resilience that we need, and then the tools and the skills that we need to be able to bring about change. So the sort of content, Asma's mentioned it, we have face-to-face retreats, but we also do quite a lot of online work. It uses less greenhouse gases to whiz everybody around the world. It takes less time. We've found that we can certainly connect up with people well. And what we do is we're bringing in a fundamental to everything that we do is the primacy of First Nations thinking. We live in this place called Australia, and First Nation culture live and think and are connected in a relational way. And so everything that WELA does puts that right up the front, and that if we are not dealing with all of those systemic issues, that they are intersectional. And so we need to be dealing with all of them. They are part of the colonial systems, including our legal and our institutional systems, our education and our agriculture and our thinking. So it's a big task to decolonize our thinking and to posit a really a positive future. So we bring in all sorts of people, and I've certainly got ALA in my mind about where we bring you into the WELA program, but also the materials. So we certainly have materials that you would be sharing that we share in common, and so we can do more of that. And you can see some of the people that we've had on in the past and whom you work with, such as Paulina. And I just wanted to mention just briefly about the change making, and this is fundamental to the way that we think. ALA, from my point of view, is a change agent, and you're working in a whole range of ways, including in the legal institutions, which is a reformist role, but you bring a change making brain and heart to that space. So we need to have people who step over lines, and I've been in that situation several times when I think the law is absolutely wrong. And that you need people who are flagging that. You need the rebels, the reformers, the change agents, so that we bring our citizenry along, and that's our challenge right now. And I'd like to recognise all of the First Nation people across Australia, and what a tough journey it is right now. So just Cherie Bruce is a wonderful First Nation woman from Queensland, And I think that that sense of support has been fundamental to so many of the people who participated in WELA. And Misty Nelson is another fantastic participant from an intensive. So if you would like to be connected with us, you can go on our website, you can connect through the Slack community immediately, introduce yourself, find other people who are similar to you. We hold webinars. We've currently got a call out for people who'd like to be involved with the national program. If you think there's room for an intensive with ALA, we can have discussions around that. What we're driven by is we need to make massive change as soon as we can. And we need a different form of leadership with a different goalpost to make the sorts of changes that we need for us to be both resourced, nourished and resilient in the face of some really significant challenges that we've got. We need to transform ourselves, transform our community in order for us to have that resilience and to be actually nourished in the way that we can as a species going forward as well. So I'm looking forward to having some discussion now with all of you wonderful people on this call.
Thank you so much, Louise. And Asma had to leave us, but a huge thank you to her too for being part of the initial discussion. I will just put myself in spotlight, even though I don't love to do that. It's helpful for folks to see us. Louise, some folks have been asking about the Slack channel, but I will make sure we share that. And I know Asma or yourself have sent me your slides, so I'll make sure that we share that with people. Everyone who's registered for this webinar, will send that to them. And also, Louise, just want to let you know, this is a public webinar, so there's some folks who are connected to ALA, but because we're so small, there's a lot more folks who are doing their own thing. There's some amazing women leaders in here already. I can see Sheena Gilman from BirdLife Australia, Diane Evers, who we worked with a couple of years ago when we were introducing the Rights of Nature Bill into the WA Parliament. Diane did a brilliant job. It's the first time ever in an Australian Parliament that these issues were even discussed sensibly, so that was amazing. And there's lots of other terrific people, forgive me for not mentioning. So what I'll do is I will put to Louise questions that come through from you guys and girls, and any questions that I have. Diane has actually asked, what do you suggest as first steps to getting the community together?
You know, people are attracted by through the heart. So it's actually absolutely by bringing people together to share. So having sharing circles where people share how they are feeling, what their aspirations are. Yeah, you know, they can be called all sorts of things, like kitchen table talks. You know this stuff, Diane, very well. And I think we've got to keep coming back to the things that we know do work. When people feel supported, then they have more ability to go out there and make significant change.
Lovely, thanks, Louise. I have a question for you. It's often said that women work more collaboratively than men. I do find on the whole that that's true, but there's also just as much competition, nastiness, bullying and meanness amongst women and women-on-women violence, particularly in hierarchical employment places. How do you honestly and openly address those issues when you're bringing people together? Because, you know, we've been raised in a culture that focuses on the individual and competition, and it often doesn't come naturally to people to play well with others. I'd love your insights and thoughts on that.
Certainly, you know, establishing agreements about behaviour is a really important start, because I think that because of the dominant leadership style that exists in our dominant society, it does support hero leaders and competition. And for many women, they choose in those institutions to use exactly those same tactics to crawl their way on the top of anybody that they can, to achieve you know, a position of leadership. And I think turning that around requires a number of things. One of the things that you can do in an institution with that sort of hierarchical and that form of non-relational leadership is actually a union term, caucusing, where you actually bring people together to be able to provide that support. So that's a great starting point, and it speaks to what Di was just talking about there too. Who is it who is in that environment that you can come together and say, okay, how can we change this and how can we back each other in a positive and supportive way, changing the language, calling out when there's bullying and harassment and inappropriate language and behaviour. But when you've got some support, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. And then once you do that, you start to make the cracks and you bring in outside perspectives, you call attention to things. Data can be very powerful also. So when you've got some stats and say, do you know, I was just looking at the lack of diversity in our workplace. These are the stats that say if you have got gender and a whole range of other diversity in your workplace, you're more effective. And I believe that's true too. What are we going to do to address that? So I think you can be really quite pointed.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the trick is I've seen a few processes attempted that way, and then often it still turns into a backstabbing. So I think we all have a lot to learn about working collaboratively and how to, what Mary Graham would call recalibrate, how we recalibrate ourselves whilst not harming others and saving face and enabling people to stay in that space so they can keep talking to each other. I've just seen so many processes of AILA's built a lot of networks and a lot of different groups, and yeah, it's still something I see challenging in our culture, even among some women. So
yep.
Thank you for your thoughtful response. The fabulous Diane has another great question. How do you inspire women to speak up when there are men driving the conversation?
Yes, I think that once again, it's about different processes, and we do a lot of this sort of work. So some of the processes are things like saying, there are several people here that we haven't heard from at all. What I'd really appreciate is if we actually go around so I get a sense of what each of the people here, if they'd like to share, has to say. What I do is I constantly have what I refer to as scripts for those situations so that you prepare for what I would refer to as a crucial conversation, and you create your script to be able to be pre-prepared, because sometimes in the heat of the moment it's really difficult to respond because you have your own triggered responses. So what you do is you go, okay, it's very likely I've seen this pattern before. I'm going to develop my script here to be able to deal with this situation. And that's where you can also caucus with maybe somebody else who's going to be in that same environment so that you're able to back each other up. So the other person then says, yeah, I would really appreciate a chance to speak myself, which I haven't had. And I really would appreciate hearing from several people. And I'm aware that we haven't actually checked in with them this whole meeting.
No, that's lovely. Thank you. I like that idea too of having a script, because, you know, we are human beings. We do have emotions, and it's very hard for women to speak up, and, you know, particularly when it's been an entrenched cycle of being ignored or not listened to. So having a script means you've got a safe way to keep gently asking or eventually forcefully asking. And even that ensuring going round and round and having sure that everyone speaks is, I've found that a very powerful tool, because you don't mention gender at all sometimes, and that doesn't annoy anyone. You just say everyone needs to speak. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. I'm just looking for more questions from others. Otherwise, I've got heaps. Susan's just said, women can use this platform to showcase our soft skills. The weaving. Yeah, I often think of it as the weaving together of those conversations. Louise, when you're involved in the training workshops and such, I'm wondering how many folks do you bring together in a training workshop or a talking circle? How does that work? What numbers or size works best for you when you're doing this work?
Yes, in the national program, about 24 is our maximum number. And same when we're doing the intensives, we tend to go for about 20. and we have a team of we have a diverse team. And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about where people come from across Australia for the national program, about age, about rural, about urban, cultural background, the organisational background. So we have a mixture of people who are working in state government, local government, federal government, businesses, a lot of not-for-profits who are right on the cutting edge. And putting them together means that you've got people who've got skills to share. So a lot of the program really is driven by the people who come together. And as a result of that intense learning experience and networking experience, they are making lifelong friends, and they connect thereafter. We always have a Slack channel for each group that comes on a program with us, and they are connecting up with each other. They self-organise post either an intensive or the national program. The other thing, the other thing I haven't mentioned is that in the national program, we also organise one-on-one mentoring. So the people who are involved in those programs, which run, the national programs run over around about a 6-month, 7-month period. Next year, we're running one that is the 2 week-long retreats are based in Victoria, Seymour, in a on country. And the other will be, for the first time, be run in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. So we're reaching out to try to have people not having to travel so far, so we have less greenhouse gas emissions, and reaching to different women. So the mentoring is really significant. It runs over about a 9 months to a 12-month period, and we discuss it with each individual about who they would see as really helpful. Michelle's stepped up as a pro bono mentor for one of the women from Western Australia who's involved with the current program. And
yeah, I can't wait to start. It'll be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome, and they're just so appropriate. It's exactly what the particular participant needs to help her with her objective, which is about setting up an organisation to specifically have the Canning River having its own voice. That's what she's wanting to do.
And voice is a loaded word at the moment, but it's connected to the idea of legal personhood or rights of nature, or however we want to frame it. And in fact, more appropriately in Australia, it's how do we look at our ecosystems and learn from Indigenous relationships with places, and raise their ability to be cared for and protected and managed and loved, etc. So I'm just noticing how, it's a very difficult topic at the moment. So moving on, Jess has said, oh, please pop in and say hello when you're in the Blue Mountains. So that's lovely. Kerry has asked, what are some of the wins that you've experienced? You shared some of those individual stories about people who've really felt confident, but perhaps if you could speak a bit more about that, or even other things that, and it's WELA. I was saying WELA, you say WELA? Yeah. So whatever WELA sees as wins for its work.
Do you know, the most important feedback that you get is that you're meeting a need. And the reason why I can say that has been a major win is that we are now having 3 times the number of people who want to be on our national program, for the places that more than 3 times the number are now applying, which is why we're doubling the numbers. The fact that we're reaching out and running intensives across a whole range of different sectors is another major win. So just as an example, the specific one for local government, women working in local government, it was clearly just such a need. They felt so isolated, and working in an institution that's really tough going because it's really a bit inured to change, positive change. They are sharing resources. When they get a bit stuck, they go, has anyone got a duty statement for a such and such position? And someone else says, yes, I've just done that. Bam, off. They're doing that work, which means that they can be doing the more innovative work because they're doing everyday stuff that they have to do. And that's part of the issue that we've all got, is there's so much make work that you can't get onto the transformative stuff that you want to. So those things are absolutely key. The fact that we are able to attract philanthropic funds, which is where we get most of our support from. The national program doesn't cover its fees adequately. Our fees are about $6,600 per person to participate in the national program. We offer scholarships for First Nations people, and we have some specific ones for people coming from remote areas. The $6,600 covers transport. So for people coming from a distance, the people who are coming from Victoria are cross-subsidising effectively, because the fee is the same for everybody. So it's an equalising, and we have been able to keep on attracting support for the overall program to grow, and that's really another sign of impact. But the key impact are those examples that we've shared, and that is that people feeling that they have the capacity and they have got the confidence to step up further. So we've had quite a few of the participants saying being involved with WELA has meant that they've had the confidence to say, I have wanted to do something, I'm going to do it. And so they actually are then applying for and driving change in a different role that they have got the skills and the desire to make significant changes in. So that's probably the greatest impact. And some of them, as mentioned with the WA Forest Alliance, we also did an intensive for the Victoria Forest Alliance just before the last state election. It meant that the 20 women who were involved had the support that kept them feeling more resilient in the face of an election campaign, which are often debilitating, and to know that their job was to be resilient because it was post the election that their work really started. And it was after the election they regrouped very quickly and were able to get on to their main job. And I think it was substantial in having them in good shape when then the state government also there announced an end to native forest logging, and that they are now centrally involved in the discussions around transition. And that's really important, because that's actually where it's really going to make the strongest impact, is what does the future look like post native forest logging?
No, that's wonderful. I mean, knowing that all these women are getting the support, the confidence, and I guess the kind of intersectoral support from others as well is really, really important. Michelle's asked a question about the intentional community that you live in, but just before we go to that, if you don't mind, while we're still sort of talking about the support for women, I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the research that you often refer to about why women's leadership matters. And even if you have references or other slides that you'd like to share, we can share that with people later. But that's actually of great interest to me, because I'm not familiar with that. I know women are awesome, but it's really nice to know where that hard research is.
Yes, and there's some specific research that Robin James with the Nature Conservancy has just put together about women in that particular sector alone. But the actual beginning of WELA was actually out of a research project, Australian research grant, and was conducted by Jane Felix and Judy Lambert. Judy Lambert went on to help to set up WELA. Jane Felix died of cancer after doing this research project, and Judy completed it. And it was doing research across the conservation, environment and climate movement in Australia. What did the leadership look like, and what was the role of women? And it was really clear through that research project that while women were a predominant force in those movements for change, the major spokespeople, the heads of those organisations, were still predominantly male, and that some of the language that was being used was also very hero male dominated. It was felt that there was a frustration by women who were leading from behind is one of the terms that can sometimes be used. Well, you know, for everybody who's behind a mic, there's about a half a dozen people who are actually scurrying around, organising events, doing the relational work. And while you need someone behind a mic, it's actually terrific to be sharing that role too, because it means that people can see visibility of a whole collaboration behind somebody who takes on a role like that. So a lot of that work was done behind what WELA then came out of. They held a forum in Canberra with women who'd been involved in that research and people who are in the environment movement, and to talk about, well, what do we do after you do a piece of research like that? You do not want to produce a report that sits on a shelf. So it was like a very practical discussion, and they went, we need to bring women together and provide them with the skills and the understanding and the confidence to be able to step up. And that's out of that. WELA was born in 2016, and I might add, I applied to be a participant on that first program. I'd been running leadership programs in WA, and I thought, this sounds fantastic. I need to get in there with a whole bunch of other women and make a difference. And they were actually needing another facilitator, and went, hold on, here's somebody we think we can rope in right in there and be part of the facilitation team. So I did. It was scary and fantastic. Best way to learn is just dive in head first.
That's excellent. And so that report or other reports, are they on your website? Can people find that easily? Or perhaps you could just collate some and send them to me?
Yes, and in fact, we are in that process. And I mentioned Asma mentioned we've just put on a person to do research for 6 months. So we're going to have a whole bunch of data that we'll be then sharing through. And we can certainly be sharing that with you, and it'll be online extensively, because that's our job, is to get that data to show what the actual picture is.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that having that information is actually helpful for other groups who are trying to promote different ways of working, and particularly trying to seek funding for women and their work, their unique way of working. So that's terrific. Thank you. So now I will not interrupt the questions any longer. I will go back to Michelle's lovely question. She's asked if you could tell us about your intentional community.
Sure. It's called the Wallery. It's on a piece of wonderful land, rural land, close to William Bay National Park. It's a third remnant vegetation mixed Karri and Jarramari forest. It was an old dairy farm, and it's 62 hectares. And I was already looking for a community coming out of being involved with the Franklin blockade. I really got an experience of what it's like to live really closely with people who deeply care and who are prepared to put themselves on the line to act in a way that's consistent with their values. So when I came back to WA, I joined an association that existed at that time called the Australian Association for Sustainable Communities. And I was found by the Wallery when they were looking for somebody who had skills in training on conflict resolution, consensus decision making, and facilitation skills. And I'd been doing all of those. So we found each other. It was like a marriage made in heaven. And they hauled me down there, and I ran some workshops, and there were 2 houses for sale, and my partner and I had 2 young children, 6 months old and 2 years old, and we had absolutely zero money. We borrowed every cent from friends and family, and within about 2 months we were down there in our community. It's called a multiple occupancy. We have multiple occupancy. It's one title. We are all members of an incorporated association. There is no separate ownership of any of the land. And we've had a lot of different Aboriginal communities come and camp here and stay here and visit, and we're good friends with some of the local groups, and they go, that's how we live. That's how we think. You know, it's like a collective responsibility, collective ownership, and sharing of resources. And yeah, it's like a big family. So you have to work hard at relationships. Well, that's what relational practice is about, is actually investing in our relationships with each other and with the natural world. That's what it's about. And when you do that, you get it back.
That's lovely. And Michelle, if there are other questions you have about eco-villages, our sister organisation, the New Economy Network Australia, has a range of webinars, and particularly the Housing Week discussions about share housing, co-housing, eco-villages, lots of wonderful ways for people to live differently and to live together. When I say differently, not everyone lives in communal housing, that's all. Yeah, it's terrific. We've got a lovely group here. What I'm wondering, could you all take for a moment, just a moment, have a think. I'd actually love for you to write in the chat any of the issues you've ever encountered or feel that you've encountered as a woman in your workplace or in your community work, that perhaps you'd like to raise here. Feeling, I'll start. Only last week I was talking with a non-man person, a non-woman person, sorry, a bloke, and really felt that despite me sharing and me sort of helping to lead a process for us to work together, it really felt like I wasn't there. I literally felt like there was no reflective listening, no feedback. I feel that that has happened a lot, and as a woman, it's just something that I've got my radar up about. So I'd love for you guys and girls to share any thoughts you have about barriers or issues you've bumped up against, because it's a nice opportunity to perhaps flag a couple of them and talk to Louise about perhaps what they do in their training courses or their workshops. And if you don't feel like sharing, that's totally fine. I just thought it's a nice opportunity for you to pop some thoughts into the chat. In the meantime, while people think about that, any barriers they've bumped into, Louise, I've got a question, another question, which is about, with your training and your process work, how do you factor in the very different types of personalities and such, like an extrovert versus an introvert, or I'm assuming different languages, but different personality types in particular? As I get older and more aware of how I work and how other people work and the similarities and the differences, it's become something really of interest to me, how we nurture the quiet ones, the loud ones, the nervous ones, everybody.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so retreats can actually be quite challenging for introverts.
Yes.
And what we do is our day program has a 2-hour break over the lunch times in order for people to go out and connect with nature, because we're always in the natural environment wherever we have the retreats. We also have different sorts of processes. So we hardly ever use a PowerPoint, I've got to say. It's mostly small group work, pairing. We have individual journaling. We use different art forms. Sometimes we bring theatre into it. We have nature walks. So it's a key part of collaborative leadership is about the recognition that diversity, like in the natural world, diversity is such an incredible strength. And it's how do we both recognize it and bring it into everything that we do. And some of the people who annoy us the most are the people that we need in our teams.
I love that. That's great.
And if I have that in my mind all the time, it's like, somebody's annoying me, what's going on? Is it that they're actually working out of a distress moment? Or is it because I actually really need to be opening myself to this person's capability and difference? And the other thing I wanted to just make sure I mention, can I please thank all of the gender diverse people who are here, including all of the males who are here. A key part of what we do is we talk about men as allies, that the men who are here, good on you for being here in this space, and that it's such an essential part is that we work collaboratively and that we bring them on this journey together, because we need to walk together to make the space. A key thing that men can do is make space, because the dominant culture doesn't have equality of the space that's made for women and gender diverse people. And so it's stepping down, making the space deliberately and going, oh, I'd really love to hear from Michelle. She's got some fantastic things to share. And so there you've got.
No one ever asks me. They're normally asking me to shut up. But it's a great suggestion, a great example. Maybe use somebody else's. But yes, yeah. And we've got some great comments coming in. I might read a few, Louise, and if you feel like commenting, please do. Thanks, everyone. It's really important to me that we have, a semblance of a discussion. If we were a slightly smaller group, we could just turn the mics off, but it does get a bit crazy otherwise. So I'm just going to read a couple. So Angela has said, when I asked about barriers, the times where blokes disregard the ideas and solutions we put forward in a meeting and then turn around a few minutes later and offer them as their own. I think that's definitely something people have had. I'll read a couple, Louise, and you can just selectively pick. Diane has said, I've had to work at trying to not immediately gravitate to conversations with men in work situations. It's like I've been raised to expect men to know something. That is interesting. Let's come back to that one. Kerry, sorry, the names are sliding down. I've just finished a major investigation into a transport safety issue, engaged by a solicitor who I've done a lot of investigations with before. A technical expert from the UK was engaged, a male, and at every meeting we've had, it's been assumed he's the leader and is deferred to. And I've dealt with this in 25 years of consulting. It's not new, but still frustrating. Absolutely. Another one, after years of working in male-dominated professions and being part of the change for women's justice and equality, I now face a new challenge, age. Older women seem to be discouraged in the workplace, especially in leadership roles. If you came in later in life, might pause there and we'll come back to that. Louise, I bet none of these sound new to you.
No. None of them sound, that yes, they're very similar to so many of the experiences of others. And I think one of the things I'd just like to refer to is, that terminology around imposter syndrome, which both men and women can experience, but women experience much more strongly. And I just wanted to say that there's actually there is a major systems component to imposter syndrome. So the feeling of not being good enough and being undermining yourself is actually also that you're not listened to in the dominant culture. You are not acknowledged and respected in that same way. And several of your comments in the chat refer to that. And so some of that is actually being prepared and having those scripts and having your support in place to actually challenge. So in those, what can sometimes be referred to, particularly in places like engineering consulting, in a intersectional feminist literature, you'd refer to some of those environments as deeply masculine, where it's got a predominance of men and it's really difficult to penetrate that. And so you have to really think about your strategies, and it's so worthwhile challenging it. And this is where also men allies can be really important. So you talk to them and say, look, I know you really respect the work that I do. My experience has been it's deeply sexist. What I need, so particularly this is to you, Kerry, hopefully there's somebody else in there, you say, it's deeply offensive to me, and my experience is that I am not recognised in the role that I have here. It would be much easier for me if you called that out rather than me, because it will come much better. And maybe if you wouldn't mind talking to whoever is the greatest offender individually, because calling out men in a collective environment is not as successful as calling it out individually, because they get a sense of shame and they go into a defensive mode. So that's just a particular trick to be aware of. Age is part of the sexism that exists in our society, is ageism. So a male as it gets older, is more respected. A female, as she gets older, is considered to have somehow lost part of their capability. So yeah, I'm a grey hair myself, so I have had that experience. I tell you what, I don't put up with it in the way that I used to. WELA has been very good for me as well.
Well, can I say, Louise, that I think it's many women I speak to, and I definitely can vouch for this, somewhere between the ages of 38 and 42, you just lose the tolerance and you suddenly are able to speak up. I certainly was. Maybe it's just my generation, you know, that after sort of everyone sort of proceeds through their lives a little differently. But I just found women, after they were hit their late 30s, if they weren't already assertive, by golly, they caught up. There's another, I sort of stopped after 3 or 4 comments. So let me read just another one. Tina said, a barrier, men who have a dictatorial communication style, who think consultation is, how do I make sure I get other people to always agree with me?
Yes. Well, do you know, there's some terrific material around what does consultation and engagement look like.
Yeah.
And so having a little piece, a script around, I don't know what you think consultation is, but I'd like to just put in front of you the different categories of consultation. And I want to be clear about what actually your intention here is an example. Because
that's a great way to start with a question. I don't know what you think about this, whatever this definition or issue is, but perhaps we could talk about this issue. Yeah, that's great. Sheena has written something. I'm not sure if I've understood it correctly. I think it might be sad that women.
Oh, I think it's Sheena. I think this. I know Sheena quite well. She was part of WELA. Wow. Yes.
Is it sometimes, Sheena, is it that women are sucking up and then they disregard you when it suits them, so that they can look subordinate to you? That's women on women misbehavior. That's
it is, you know, and so women can play those same sort of games, non-collaborative games, and I think that they're not the ones that you're going to caucus with, really, to change the nature of how you actually talk. I referred to agreements. Agreements are incredibly important in your team, or in a meeting, or in a association or a group, or whatever it is. Actually saying, I'd like to talk about how we're actually going to talk with each other, how we're going to meet with each other, how we're going to listen to each other. It would be very helpful for me to have transparency around that. I would appreciate it, just as a start, to kick this off. I would appreciate it if people have some sort of criticism they'd like to direct at me, or have an issue with me, that they talk to me about it and they don't talk to somebody else about it first. So give me the right to actually have a discussion with you and address it. That stops backbiting.
Yeah. Well, a key element of the work we do in AILA is a focus on governance at all scales of human life, which is the rules we make to live, work, and play together. So I couldn't agree more. Making things as clear as possible actually helps down the track. And just speaking about the dictatorial style, not just the meaning of consultation, but how people can push for their own agenda in a discussion or a meeting. And can I also just flag an important issue? We're talking a lot at the moment about getting allies in your organization or other people to understand you. May I say that in a very teeny tiny group like ours, we're nearly always working horizontally with other groups. And it's not often possible to sort of create the environment in the first instance. It takes a little while if you're going to actually work with someone, to then try to build that trust, that you can have those conversations. You know, it's almost easier in a workplace where people sort of have to do the right thing if the hierarchy is going to work to a point. So small, independent, or women particularly working on their own, what advice would you have for them, Louise? People who are out there kind of promoting and talking on their own without the allies or the folks in the room in a real meeting or whatever.
Yes, and Susan mentioned this, that actually doing some role playing is incredibly helpful. So one of the sessions that I run in WELA always is critical conversations, where you think about a conversation that's really difficult you need to have, or you've had, didn't go well, and you actually then go and you write your script, you prepare for it, you role play it, and you role play it more than once, so that you're thinking about, well, how do you get the best outcome you possibly can from this situation? What do you want? What is the response likely to be? How are you going to frame it? And then you role play it. And sometimes you can actually bring a support person into that environment, particularly if it's one where you don't feel safe. You can actually set it up to have somebody else there, even if you're a sole worker. You know, that's actually your imprimatur, is to go, I'm going to have a meeting with somebody, but I can certainly frame it in a way that's actually going to work for me.
That's lovely. Thank you. Some other good comments coming through, people just confirming that the idea of training and supporting each other. I think we kind of touched on this. What's missing is in employment onboarding is addressing sexism and ageism policies in an organization.
Yes, and really part of that addressing the need for greater diversity in workplaces and so on, and in leadership roles, is making sure that even the way that a duty statement is framed changes. So, for example, those soft skills somebody referred to, those soft skills that are absolutely critical. And if you have a look at organisational research on what makes effective organisations, it are organisations where they have relationships at the base, where their values are clear, where people are heard, where people have responsibility for their areas, where you've got more women and diversity in your team. So when right at that stage of looking for somebody new to come into a team, how the duty statement is framed is absolutely fundamental. Then who sits on the selection committee, and how that framing of values and the agreements about the culture of an organisation and being transparent about that. What does our culture look like? Who does get, who are the stories about in terms of who's idolised? What are the rituals? What is the structure of how people sit? Who has the power? Is it shared? All of those things come into the picture even before you actually have interviews and select somebody. And so then it's like, who actually is bringing that person on board? And do they have a buddy, so they're not left to sink or swim, but the culture is described, and the culture is actually framed in a relational way with clear agreements, and it's a safe workplace and a collaborative one.
That's lovely. That's terrific. Some other comments have come in, but perhaps we've got about 5 to 8 minutes left, folks. So if you do have burning questions or issues, please pop them in the chat. But I wonder, Louise, if we could turn, we've spoken a lot about just now about the women's role, the way women feel, the way they're treated. Let's talk specifically about the work that people do in the environmental field. I wonder if you could comment on, with your experience, how different or not is it for women when they're working on environmental issues, say, as compared to working in a law firm or working in a cafe? What qualities inside the environmental movement do you see people, women particularly, but people should be aware of in the way that we work together?
I think one of the things which I have referred to that came out of our literature is that we can have an expectation that the culture is going to be more nurturing, and it isn't necessarily. Some environments might be, but there are others of some of the larger environmental organisations where it mirrors the larger society, and it can be deeply disappointing if you find yourself in that environment. So I think that's the first thing, is you assess the environment that you go into on how it actually is experienced by you. So that's the first thing, is that one of the reasons why those environments can also be really quite difficult is because they are pressure cooker environments. Many of the not-for-profit organisations in the environment movement don't have sufficient resources and are working on urgent and critical issues. That means that they can sometimes think that spending time on those relational soft skills is somehow a waste of time. And you often will find, particularly the males in that cohort, or people who are more task oriented. So we talk about task and maintenance and how critical both of those are in any organisation. And I think sometimes people who are attracted to working in particularly campaign-based organisations are very task-oriented because they are driven to want to make a change. And they can sometimes actually just miss the fact that maintenance is critical. If you want to bring volunteers in and keep them there, and most people in campaigns are volunteering, then those relationships form the basis of whether your campaign is going to be successful. So I think that certainly is a challenge in that environment. A challenge in an environment like a business, a law firm. We just recently had a session on change from within, and we had people who are working in the investment sector, really passionate about having investors put their money into things that are positive for the environment. What a terrific thing for those women to be working in that space. It's tough. They are working in a very male-dominated, traditional way where they've had to figure out strong ways of supporting themselves. So that's self-nurturing. How do they resource themselves? What provides their wellspring? I've got a wellspring inside that I know is there when I need it, and I need to keep on topping it up by going out into nature. And they talked a lot about that, but they also talked about when they're interacting in that environment, that every person they interact with is also a human being that has vulnerabilities and who cares about their family. And so if you have that as your way of approaching any other human being, even the most difficult ones, it can be very helpful because it can open a opportunity rather than seeing just the challenge. And I think the other thing I want to just point to is that anybody, whether you're working within the current structures or you're working in not-for-profits who are outside of those institutional frameworks, that the current crises in the world are deeply challenging to all of us. And so something that I've really been talking about more, and I personally run a despair and empowerment session as part of the national program now, is in recognition. And I think the Psychologists for a Safe Planet are really terrific as an organisation helping in this space. That all of us need to recognise that these things are very difficult for us to hold, and that actually having some mechanisms for allowing yourself to truly take time off. And so my analogy in that is that we are all emergency workers. I belong to a local fire brigade. When you're on roster, you have to be fully on board, but you also need to be off roster. So all of us have got the alarm bells of climate change, of the inequity in the world, of the damage to our environment. Those are alarm bells that are ringing for me, and I'll bet for many of you, constantly in the background. It is really exhausting. And we are working in two spheres simultaneously, which is also really tiring. So the alarm's going and you're going, I have to act now. And at the same time, you're going, I have to pick the kids up from school and get some food on the table, and somebody's coming from dinner. Now, these are hard to live with that are running in parallel. Sometimes you have to roster off And everybody who's been in on a fire brigade or an emergency service or by the side of somebody in palliative care knows you have to roster off. So it's really important to make sure that you've got other people who can roster on and you roster off, and you can take those times to deeply resource your wellspring, because we need you in good shape.
That's wonderful, Louise. There's some lovely comments, people going, I really needed to hear that. And thank you for saying these things. And I think that really resonates, doesn't it? The idea that we're worried, we're concerned, we're stressed, we're in grief. I'm frightened of the summers to come. I worry about the animals. But also I've got to answer this email and work on this governance thing and do another funding application. So there's that constant switching between the mundane and, quite frankly, the terrifying, and how we look after ourselves in amongst all of that. Whatever gender or identity or person we are is hard enough. But yes, we do live in a society that doesn't make it necessarily easier for us. Louise, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we're probably going to start to wrap up in a moment. I wonder if you could just be an advertisement for some of your upcoming opportunities again. And I'll pop the website into the chat. I'm sure a lot of women in this group would love to know more about what you're offering and what they can connect with next year. And before you do that, Louise, can I extend an invitation for WELA to perhaps come and play with AILA in Southeast Queensland a bit more next year? We're going to be running some lovely in-person events here and there, particularly a gathering of many different things in September next year. And we would certainly love to support any initiatives or piggyback or, set next to each other, the kinds of things that the remarkable women and men that we work with really need to keep them going. So just maybe put that in your diary, as Michelle and the gang are super keen to help whatever is going on in our part of the world. So, but back to you.
Thanks, Michelle, because we're certainly intending to run a intensive probably around the Byron Bay area in Queensland, or potentially with the Conservation Council again. So somewhere around there, we absolutely will be doing that. We run every quarter now, we run a WELA 101 via our Slack channel. I'd really encourage people to join the Slack channel. It's really totally not onerous, but just put you in contact with some of the other opportunities, and we certainly then advertise those. If you go to our website, you will see that we have got our some of these programs are already online in terms of our events. We will next week have our applications out for our national program, so we'll be advertising those, and I'd strongly encourage you to consider putting in an application for the national program, and we will talk with you, Michelle, about the proposals that we've got in Queensland and how we can do some little piggybacking on each other. Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be lovely, because we do find a lot of stuff happens in Victoria and New South Wales, and remembering Byron Bay, despite being Northern Rivers, is still in New South Wales. Queensland, Northern Territory, WA, probably even South Australia. We have a lot of members in different places, and we do occasionally feel that the bias of money, funding and initiatives always floats to the bottom of the continent. So we would like that to float to the top if you're thinking in sheer gravity. Anyway, just flagging that we're super keen to have things locally.
Wonderful, Michelle. And on that score, I'm certainly planning a intensive co-led with Josie Alec, probably First Nations lead for the Australian Conservation Foundation in Northern WA. So we ran an intensive earlier this year with the Conservation Council, because I come from WA, but I know how needed it is for us to be not quite so East Coast, South, yes, centric.
That's great.
So we'll be running something. The Kimberley area and the north of WA is so under duress with the proposals for fracking, and the First Nations are just really up there leading and need all of our support that we can provide.
That's fantastic, and it's great to know. And I know Diane's down the bottom of WA, but I'm sure she has friends, contacts and others she can promote to as well. And many of us are from all over Australia.
The other thing I'd like to just mention is our Giving Circle, and I think Asma referred to that. it's new for us, and it's been an amazing way for people who don't want to come to a program, who think this is really important, for them to be able to connect with each other and to also provide $1,000 in a year. And then we've got 100 people, men and women, who've given to the Giving Circle, and we're just about to distribute half of that. So half of that helps with the programs and some of the ones that we are cross-subsidising, like the national program, in order to have people from Australia, across Australia, being able to be there. And the other amount is going to a number of projects. So there was a call out there for women-led projects. They've come in, and very shortly that money will go out the door. And within the space of 3 months, money's come in, projects have come in, decided, and a group of the people who provided the money have gone through and assessed those projects, and then it goes to them to vote on it and distribute it. So you can be part of the Giving Circle as well.
Excellent. That all sounds very terrific. Okie dokie. Well, Louise and previously Asma, thank you so much for joining us. We're really pleased to share the work that you're doing and to hear your wisdom and your experiences. Please do send through or remind us of any reports that you think should be shared with others. We'd love to promote this kind of support and research for women on the WELA website as well. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. For those who chatted in the chat, for those who were just listening, we're really grateful to you for your time. We know how busy you all are, and I think it's just really nice, even when we only get together on Zoom. I think it's still very helpful, very useful to connect with each other without the old carbon miles of traveling about the place. So Louise, thanks so much. And we look forward to further collaborations and staying in touch. Yeah, it's been lovely. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I've given my email in the chat. So if you want to individually be in contact with me, feel free.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Speak up, speak out, look after yourselves. See you soon.